Hello YouTube, how's everyone doing? It's Professional here. So today I have another top 5 video for you guys. And this one I'm going to be looking at the top 5 vehicles that almost no one uses. And I made a video many months ago, and that was a video, top 5 vehicles that most people don't use anymore. In that video we were focusing on vehicles that people used at one point, but don't use anymore. Here, these vehicles are vehicles that people never use, period. Almost nobody uses these vehicles. I almost never see anybody using them. If you use any of these vehicles, that's fine and all, but I've been in so many lobbies, so many full lobbies playing over the years, I barely see anybody using these vehicles. And I'm going to be explaining probably why people don't use these vehicles and what Rockstar could possibly do to make some of these vehicles better. So I hope that you guys enjoy this one. Top 5 vehicles that almost nobody uses. Starting off at number 5, we have the Jabba, and the Jabba is actually the most recent vehicle added to GTA Online on this list. Now, you guys will remember, this vehicle was released the first week of January, and it was released as part of the drip feed content for the casino heist. Now, why does almost nobody use the Jabba? The Jabba, if anybody used it, it was probably that first week that it came out. You might have seen a few people driving this thing around Los Santos and parts of San Andreas, but afterwards, almost nobody used this thing, including myself. I bought this thing one day, I tested it out, its speed, its handling, tested out the damage, and then after that, I did not use it, and this is the first time that I actually brought it out months later. This is the first time I used it because I know that almost nobody uses this thing, and I think a lot of people were disappointed with this thing because a lot of people were excited for the Jabba. They were talking about how much they really wanted to use this thing, and they thought that it would be a great vehicle. Then the thing comes out, barely anyone uses it. So why did people stop using it? I think for one, I think the fact that handling on this thing is pretty bad. Now, as you can see, in this game that I'm playing, it's raining right now, and with the rain, this thing is actually handling pretty poorly in the rain. You know, it's spinning out a lot of times, and I'm trying to do Headhunter here. The thing isn't fast. It can barely keep up with the Headhunter target. This thing does not have bulletproof windows, despite being an armored vehicle. It is armored, and I'll give it that. It can take multiple RPGs. Now, this thing can take 13 RPGs. On the 14th RPG, it explodes. So it does have good armor, but there's also other vehicles that, have good armor. For instance, the Night Shark and the Insurgent Pickup Custom. And if we take a look at this thing, in speed, it does beat a vehicle like the Conjalian speed, but the APC destroys it. It destroys it on both land and also destroys it in the water. The Jabba can float in the water, but it's so slow in the water. And the APC, it has a turret on top. This thing does not have a turret, and it's much harder to be shot out of the APC than it is to be shot out of the Jabba. So I think that's the reason that people stopped using this thing. It did not really have a purpose, and also, this is probably the worst vehicle to use in heists. In the casino heist, this is the worst vehicle to use as a getaway vehicle. If you choose this as a getaway vehicle, you are pretty much asking for trouble. You can barely escape from the cops with this thing. The cops will easily catch up to you. It's big. It can hook onto many things. Just a lot of people were not excited for the Jabba. It also struggles, to go up hills. For a vehicle like this, you'd think that it would be able to climb hills and climb mountains easily, but it doesn't do it that well. Let me know what you guys think of the Jabba, and if anybody has, any uses for this thing, let me know down below, because I would love to know some uses for this thing. I purchased this thing, expecting a little bit more from it, but unfortunately it just wasn't there, and people, they used it for the first week, but then afterwards, I almost never see anybody using this thing. Next at number 4, we have the Blimp, and the Blimp costs $1,190,350, or you can get it for a trade price of $895,000 if you complete 10 nightclub popularity missions. Now, for the Blimp, I think that it's actually reasonably priced, especially with the trade price, $895,000 for this thing. Now, I know what some people are going to tell me. They're going to tell me, but Professional, whenever I see people doing nightclub popularity missions, they're flying a Blimp. Yes, they are, but I don't count that as people using it because they're using it because they have to for a mission. They're not using it because they want to. I'm talking about when we see these vehicles in free mode, when people are using them on their own time. And while some people may own blimps, I know a lot of people do own blimps because, whenever I host a live stream, I'll occasionally see a blimp in the sky, people just messing around. The blimp is a fun vehicle to mess around with your friends, You can get a bunch of people on top of this thing and they won't fall off. You can play music from the speakers. You can mess around with this thing. It's a pretty big object, so you're trying to fly it for, narrow parts of the city can be kind of exciting, but there's not much more than that, and I don't think they can really do anything. I don't think they can do anything to make a blimp better because, what else could they add to make a blimp better? So that's why you don't really see it. I mean, when do you see people actually flying a blimp? Very rarely do I see it, and I think one reason that people don't really fly it is because it's just such a big target, because somebody just sees that blimp, they're going to want to shoot it down, they're going to blow it up. Oftentimes when I was doing the nightclub popularity mission with the blimp, I would get shot down and attacked much more than when I was doing any other popularity mission, because people just see that big target in the sky and they go to blow it up. However, though, I am going to compliment the Blimp on two things. The first thing that I'm going to compliment it on is that the Blimp is actually a pretty fast vehicle for its size. Now, it's not one of the fastest air vehicles in the game, don't get me wrong, but for its size, it's actually a decently fast vehicle. I was actually surprised by how fast this thing goes, and it can gain altitude really fast, so this thing can gain altitude really fast in the sky. It's actually faster than the Bombushka. The Bombushka, which is the slowest plane in the game, this thing will actually beat it in speed, and will catch up to the Bombushka. So for being a big vehicle like that, I think it gains altitude pretty fast, and I think it does have decent speed. Another thing that I was impressed with it is the fact that if you're not going extremely fast, and you hit an object, it's not going to necessarily explode, because as you can see right here, I was denting this thing against many buildings, and it did not actually explode. I thought that the second I would like hit some building, even at slow speed, I thought this thing would explode. But it didn't explode for me. If you're going full speed and you slam into a building, you're probably going to explode, but, you know, just hitting buildings, scratching buildings, it's not necessarily going to blow up. That's what I like about this thing, but that's really why people don't use the Blimp, because there's not really a need for it, you know, when is somebody actually going to fly this thing around? At number 3, we have the RCV, also known as the Riot Control Vehicle, and this thing came out with the Doomsday Heist back in December of 2017, and it cost a regular price of $3,125,000, but you can get it for a trade price of $2,350,000 if you complete the Doomsday Heist setups involving the RCV. Now, the RCV is a more complicated vehicle. The RCV is a vehicle that people have a love-hate relationship with. Some people love this thing, some people absolutely hate this thing. Now, the point is I barely see anybody use this thing. Almost never see anybody use this thing. And the one time that I have actually used this thing, and I've seen a few other people use it, is when you're fighting griefers, is sometimes people will actually, you know, go ghost or go off the radar. They'll get into this thing and then they'll water cannon people. They'll hose them down. It's a fun vehicle to mess around with your friends. And another thing is this vehicle is actually kind of useful for stopping God mode griefers, because many God mode griefers, when they use a God mode glitch, if you actually hose them down with the water cannon, it'll actually kill them and take them out of the God mode glitch. So the RCV was handy with that, but it does get blown up in one RPG. And to tell you the truth, I've seen more of the fire truck being used than the RCV, because the fire truck you can just pick up regular and free mode, you pick it up the fire station, you drive it around, people want to roleplay firefighters, but I don't really see the RCV because you have to purchase it, and it's a pretty expensive vehicle. You know, the regular price, $3,125,000 for a vehicle that gets blown up in one RPG and, you know, has a water cannon. The water cannon is the most unique feature on this vehicle, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have many more uses. I will say, though, that the RAM on this thing is actually pretty good. The RAM on this thing is actually better than most arena war vehicles, because if you go with this thing, you hit another vehicle pretty good speed, you'll smash that vehicle out of the way, and you won't lose that much speed when hitting other vehicles. So the RAM, I will compliment on, but other than that, not much more of a use. People aren't using this thing. What they can do is they can add, like, you know, like maybe like a vigilante firefighter, you know, missions with this thing, where, you know, you get into an RCV, you spawn it, and you can spawn, like, certain missions where, like in the old GTA games, you go around to an area, you knock out the fires, you know, that would actually make a use for it. You get paid for that. People would actually like using it. So, you know, they could add, you know, firefighting missions with this vehicle. They could also use that with the fire truck, but that's one way to make the RCV more useful. Other than that, I almost never see anybody use this thing, ever. Moving on to number 2, we have the Dump, which cost $1 million. There is no trade price on this thing, and this is the oldest vehicle on this list. It's been in the game since day one. I don't think I really need to go into much detail on why people don't use the Dump. I very rarely see this thing. I almost never see anybody use this thing, and, you know, the reason is it's pretty obvious. It is one of the largest vehicles in GT Online. It's also extremely slow, so it's a very large vehicle. It can get stuck in many places. It runs over vehicles. They can explode. It can cause a dump to catch on fire and blow up. It can't fit in most tunnels in the game. Gets hooked onto much stuff. However, though, I will say this. It's a very, very unique vehicle. Even though it's very rarely used and it doesn't have that many uses, it is a very rare vehicle. I can't think of any other vehicle that really compares to this thing. Just this giant, massive truck, you know, this construction truck. Kind of fun to mess around with your friends. And, you know, the one time that I know people have used this thing is they've done swing set glitches with this thing in the past. A swing set glitch is basically where you drive into, like, a wall and the thing will just throw you back. So you'll be flying back in the sky. People have done this with this, where, you know, they shoot this thing up in the sky, they fly across the map with this thing, kind of do that for fun, but other than that, almost never seen anybody use it, and on top of that, it also gets blown up in one RPG, so that's really the reason people don't use this thing. Before I reveal the number one vehicle that I almost never see anybody using, I wanted to make a few special mentions. These, they don't really need introductions. And the number one vehicle that I never see anyone use is the Kraken. And we could also put the other submersible on here, but I'm going to focus mostly on the Kraken because it's a vehicle that people can personally own, where in the submersible they can't. The Kraken costs $1,325,000, or you can get it for free if you are a returning player. If you were a returning player, you played on the PS3 or the Xbox 360, and then you went to the next-gen consoles, or even to PC, then you were able to acquire this thing for free. It was free for returning players. So a lot of people actually probably already own this, but they almost never use it. And you think to yourself, when was the last time you actually saw somebody use this? When was the last time you actually saw somebody in the middle of the ocean, underwater, in a Kraken? You almost never see it happen. The few times that I remember people using this is before we even had businesses, I'd say, late 2014, early 2015. Some people, they used the Kraken and they would hide underwater if they had a bounty. And it was absolutely hilarious if you had a bounty and you were sitting underwater and the people couldn't get to you. They were flying around in helicopters above you. They were flying around in jets above you. They could not get to you when you were underwater in this. So that's the only time that I've actually seen people use it, is when they were trying to, you lose a bounty, they would take this thing, sit underwater for some time. But other than that, almost never see anybody use it. And why is nobody using it? The reason is because there's nothing to do underwater. Sure, the Kraken, you can explore all the ocean underwater and not have to worry about running out of air, and it does have, decent speed for a submarine, but it gets hooked onto many things when you're underwater, and there's nothing to do underwater. You can look at what's down there. You can find, different planes and different, vehicles that were crashed underwater and stuff. And you can find different landmarks underwater. But other than that, there's nothing. What they could do in the future is if Rockstar makes, a naval update ever in the future, they could make this vehicle so much more useful. So much more useful. And this vehicle, including the Stromberg and the submersible underwater vehicles, they could be much more useful. If we had things that we could actually find underwater, imagine we could actually find certain things underwater. Like we could find money underwater, like in a suitcase or something like that. Certain treasures that we could actually find underwater. We explore, we find random treasure. I guarantee you much more people would be using the Kraken. But until then, we have a whole underwater world and we have nothing to get out of it. So that's why people don't use the Kraken. They just don't have a use for it. When was the last time you saw this thing actually in the water? So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. And if you're new to my channel, enjoy my content, subscribe. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care, everyone.